The journey beyond conformity begins with a moment of awakening, the quiet yet profound realization that much of who you believe yourself to be has been constructed, not discovered. It is the point in life when the voice within you begins to whisper, "This is not all that I am." Until this awakening, most people move through life wearing invisible layers of expectations, the beliefs of their parents, the rules of their culture, the ideals of their society. You grow up being told what success looks like, what love should feel like, and what kind of person you must become to be accepted. Without realizing it, your identity becomes a collection of borrowed definitions. But there comes a time when this external script no longer fits. You begin to sense that something inside you is restless, a part of you yearning to breathe freely, to speak its own truth, to live without pretending. That stirring is the authentic self awakening from beneath the weight of conditioning. This awakening often begins subtly, perhaps as a feeling of dissatisfaction even when life appears successful on the surface. You might have achieved what society told you would bring happiness, education, career, relationships, yet feel an emptiness that logic cannot explain. It is not depression, it is disconnection. It is the soul's way of saying you are living someone else's dream. The moment you recognize this gap between what the world wants from you and what your heart truly desires, the process of awakening has already begun. Awareness is the first step toward authenticity, because you cannot free yourself from what you do not see. Conditioning begins early in life. As a child, you were born whole, spontaneous, curious, and unfiltered. You cried when you needed care, laughed when you felt joy, and explored the world without fear of judgment. But slowly you learned which parts of yourself were praised and which were rejected. You were rewarded for being quiet, polite, obedient, or ambitious, and perhaps shamed for being emotional, wild, or different. Piece by piece, you began to hide the parts of yourself that others disapproved of, constructing a social self designed to win love and acceptance. Over time, this persona became so practiced that you began to mistake it for your true self. The world, too, reinforces this conditioning. From school to social media, you are taught to compare yourself, to compete, to conform to certain ideals of beauty, success, and morality. You are told who to be, what to want, and how to behave to fit in. Society rarely encourages individuality because conformity sustains order. But the price of conformity is authenticity. You become what the world applauds, not what your soul longs to express. And while this may grant temporary comfort, the comfort of belonging, it slowly erodes your sense of purpose and joy. The awakening begins when you start to question these patterns. You begin to ask, who am I when no one is watching? What do I truly want if I stop seeking approval? What beliefs have I accepted without examining them? These questions are uncomfortable because they destabilize the very identity you have built your life around. But discomfort is not your enemy, it is your guide. It signals that something false is ready to fall away. True awakening is not an external rebellion against society, but an internal revolution against unconscious living. At first, awakening can feel disorienting. You may feel guilt for questioning traditions or fear for stepping outside norms. The mind resists change because it equates familiarity with safety. But the heart knows that safety built on suppression is not peace. It is silence. To awaken is to realize that you have been asleep, dreaming a life shaped by others. When you see that the roles you play, the dutiful child, the perfect student, the successful professional, are costumes rather than identities, you begin to sense the vastness beneath them. You begin to see that there is a part of you untouched by conditioning, an essence that is pure, free, and timeless. That is the authentic self. This moment of recognition often brings both liberation and fear. Liberation because you glimpse the truth that you are more than your labels. Fear because you realize that stepping into authenticity means leaving behind the comfort of conformity. The world around you may not immediately understand your transformation. Those who are still asleep may interpret your awakening as rebellion or arrogance. But the deeper you listen to your inner voice, the more you realize that authenticity is not defiance. It is alignment. It is not about rejecting the world, but engaging with it truthfully. Awakening from conditioning is not a single event. It is an unfolding process. It requires patience, awareness, and courage. You begin by observing your own patterns, noticing when you speak to please rather than to express, when you act from fear rather than conviction, when you suppress your truth to maintain harmony. Observation without judgment becomes the key. The more you witness your conditioning, the weaker its hold becomes. You start making small yet powerful choices that reflect who you truly are. You say no when you mean no. You express feelings you once hid. You follow curiosities that others might not understand. Each act of honesty strengthens your connection to your inner self. The awakening also reveals a deeper paradox. That conformity was never imposed entirely from the outside. It was sustained from within. Society may have planted the seeds, but it was your own fear of rejection that watered them. Realizing this gives you power, because what you created through fear can be uncreated through awareness. You are not a victim of conditioning. You are its participant. And because you participated in your own illusion, you also have the authority to dismantle it. This realization shifts you from blame to responsibility, from resentment to freedom. The journey of awakening is not about discarding all external influence or rejecting the world's values. It is about discernment, learning to differentiate between what resonates with your truth and what does not. You can still respect traditions, engage with society, and love others deeply, but you do so consciously, not compulsively. You no longer conform out of fear. You choose alignment out of awareness. This stage sets the foundation for everything that follows. Once you awaken from conditioning, you can no longer return to sleep. You may try to fit back into old patterns for comfort, but they will feel hollow. The authentic self, once stirred, cannot be silenced. It will continue to call you forward, urging you to live in integrity with your truth. This call will grow louder in the next stage, the inner conflict between fitting in and being real, where you must face the tension between the security of conformity and the freedom of authenticity. Once you awaken from the layers of conditioning that shaped your sense of identity, you enter one of the most turbulent yet transformative stages of personal evolution, the inner conflict between fitting in and being real. This is the moment where your newfound awareness collides with your old life. You have begun to see the illusions that shaped you, yet you still live within systems that expect you to play by their rules. It feels as if one part of you is being pulled toward truth, freedom, and self-expression, while another part clings to belonging, approval, and safety. This tug-of-war is not a sign of failure. It is a sign that awakening has truly begun to take root. In the previous stage, you realized that much of what you called self was borrowed from family, culture, religion, and society. That awakening brought clarity, but it also brought disruption. Awareness is rarely gentle. It shakes the foundations of everything you once took for granted. Now you see the masks you wear to gain acceptance. The polite smiles, the carefully curated opinions, the ways you hide your sensitivity or boldness to avoid judgment. Yet even as you recognize these patterns, part of you hesitates to remove them. Why? Because these masks once protected you, they helped you belong, they shielded you from rejection, and they earned you the affection you feared to lose. This is the paradox of awakening. You want to be free, but freedom feels unsafe. Authenticity requires vulnerability, and vulnerability threatens the fragile comfort of conformity. You begin to feel divided, torn between the person you truly are and the person others expect you to be. You may find yourself speaking your truth, then immediately regretting it. afraid that you've said too much or gone too far. You may want to follow your intuition but hesitate because it contradicts what others consider normal. Every choice becomes a battlefield between your inner truth and external expectation. Psychologically, this conflict represents the tension between the ego and the self. The ego, shaped by social conditioning, craves validation. It is deeply invested in image, reputation, and belonging. It wants to be liked, respected, and accepted. The authentic self, on the other hand, seeks expression, not approval. It desires truth over comfort, growth over security. When these two forces clash, the result is emotional turbulence, confusion, anxiety, guilt, even loneliness. You may begin to question yourself. Am I being selfish for wanting more? Am I wrong to outgrow people or environments that no longer align with me? These doubts are not signs of weakness. They are evidence that your consciousness is expanding. During this stage, it's common to experience what psychologists call cognitive dissonance, the discomfort of holding two opposing beliefs at once. You know that your authentic voice deserves expression, yet you fear that speaking it might lead to isolation or conflict. This dissonance can manifest as emotional fatigue or indecision. Some days you feel courageous and ready to live fully. Other days you retreat into old habits, afraid of the consequences of being real. The pendulum swings back and forth until you learn that inner peace cannot be found by pleasing everyone. It comes only from aligning with truth. At this point, relationships often become mirrors that reflect your inner battle. Friends, family, or colleagues may resist your changes because your authenticity disrupts the equilibrium of conformity. When you start speaking from truth, you unconsciously challenge others to confront their own masks. Not everyone is ready for that. Some may pull away, criticize, or question your choices, tempting then to shrink back into the familiar, to dilute your authenticity just enough to keep the peace. But each time you betray your truth to make others comfortable, you reinforce the very conditioning you're trying to transcend. However, it's important to understand that authenticity does not mean arrogance or rebellion for its own sake. It's not about rejecting others or defying norms out of ego. True authenticity is compassionate. It honors both your truth and the truth of others. You can live honestly without forcing others to agree with you. The challenge is learning how to stay grounded in your inner voice while remaining open-hearted toward those who do not yet understand it. This balance is the essence of emotional maturity. The inner conflict also extends beyond social dynamics. It's spiritual in nature. Conformity represents attachment to form, while authenticity represents alignment with essence. To fit in is to define yourself by external identities, nationality, profession, gender, religion, whereas to be real is to live from the formless center within you, the part untouched by labels. The mind resists this shift because it thrives on definition. But the soul whispers that you are not what you do, what you own, or how others perceive you. You are consciousness itself expressing uniquely through human form. The more you identify with that essence, the less power conformity has over you. Still, the journey is rarely linear. You may feel moments of liberation followed by waves of doubt. This oscillation is natural because your psyche is adjusting to a new level of awareness. Think of it like learning to walk again after years of crawling. Each step toward authenticity strengthens your inner confidence, making it easier to navigate a world still bound by conformity. In practical terms, this stage invites you to make conscious choices. You begin asking yourself before every action, am I doing this because it feels true or because I fear disapproval? Am I speaking from love or from a need to be liked? These small acts of self-inquiry help dissolve the unconscious patterns of conformity. Over time, you realize that authenticity may cost you certain relationships or privileges, but what you gain in return, integrity, peace, and self-respect, is priceless. As this inner conflict deepens, something remarkable happens. You begin to see that the battle between fitting in and being real was never external. It was never truly about society versus the self. It was about your own divided nature. The war between your conditioned mind and your awakened consciousness. The moment you see this clearly, the conflict begins to dissolve. You realize that authenticity does not require destroying the ego, it requires integrating it. The ego can become your servant rather than your master. It can help you navigate the world without dictating who you must be. This integration marks the transition to the next stage of the journey, the courage to embrace solitude. Once you stop betraying yourself to fit in, you must learn to stand alone, to walk through the silence that follows when the noise of external approval fades. But this solitude, though initially painful, is sacred. It becomes the space where your authentic self finally finds its voice. It is where inner conflict transforms into inner clarity. After the inner conflict between fitting in and being real reaches its breaking point, you inevitably arrive at the next stage of transformation, the courage to embrace solitude. This phase is not merely about being physically alone. It is about standing in the stillness of your own truth, without seeking validation from the world around you. It's about choosing authenticity, even when it means walking a path that others cannot yet understand. Solitude becomes the crucible in which the fragments of your emerging self are refined and fused into wholeness. It is in this sacred space that the authentic self begins to take its first independent breaths. In the previous stage, the tension between belonging and truth taught you that authenticity cannot flourish in the soil of constant approval. Now, in solitude, that lesson deepens. You begin to see that many of your fears were not about being alone, but about being left with your own silence. Because silence holds truth, and truth often dismantles illusions. When you no longer hide behind noise, busyness, or people's expectations, your inner world becomes uncomfortably visible. Every insecurity, regret, and unresolved emotion comes forward like shadows asking to be acknowledged. Solitude, then, is not peaceful at first, it is confronting. Yet this confrontation is essential, because only by facing what lies within can you become whole. In this stage, solitude functions as both a teacher and a mirror. It reflects the parts of yourself that you suppressed while conforming to others' standards. You begin to recognize how much of your energy was spent trying to maintain appearances, how often you molded yourself into what was acceptable instead of what was true. Now, stripped of external distractions, you start hearing your authentic inner voice. At first, it may be faint or hesitant, drowned by the echoes of other people's opinions. But with time, as you sit in stillness, that voice grows stronger, clearer, and more confident. It is the voice of your soul, guiding you towards self-realization. This process requires immense courage because solitude exposes you to emotional vulnerability. Humans are wired for connection, and isolation can feel unnatural. However, there is a difference between isolation born from rejection and solitude chosen from strength. In chosen solitude, you are not running from the world. You are returning to yourself. You are learning to generate your own sense of belonging from within, rather than depending on the approval of others. This internal belonging is what psychologists and mystics alike call individuation, the state of becoming an integrated, autonomous self. At this point, the ego often resists. It whispers fears of abandonment, reminding you of all the people you might lose or disappoint. But if you listen deeper beneath the fear, you will sense something profound: freedom. When you no longer require constant reassurance from others, you step into emotional independence. You discover that your worth was never dependent on being seen or praised. It was inherent all along. This realization marks a spiritual awakening, the shift from seeking love outwardly to embodying love inwardly. Many spiritual traditions emphasize the power of solitude as a catalyst for transformation. The Buddha found enlightenment under a tree in silence. Mystics and philosophers throughout history retreated into solitude to encounter the divine within. But solitude need not mean retreating to mountains or deserts. It simply means creating space in your life where external noise no longer dominates your consciousness. It might be a quiet morning before sunrise, a solitary walk in nature, or an evening spent journaling rather than scrolling. What matters is the quality of presence you bring to yourself in those moments. In solitude, you learn to listen to your breath, your intuition, your emotions, and the subtle wisdom that arises when the mind becomes still. However, solitude also reveals the fragility of your self-image. When there's no audience to impress or role to play, the masks fall away. You begin to see yourself not as a collection of titles, achievements, or social roles, but as pure being, aware, alive, and complete. This can be both liberating and disorienting. You may feel a sense of loss, as if your old identity is dying, and in many ways, it is. But that death is necessary for rebirth. What you lose in certainty, you gain in authenticity. During this transformation, loneliness often appears as a shadow companion. It whispers that you've made a mistake, that authenticity is too costly, that you should return to conformity where life felt easier. Yet loneliness is not the enemy, it is a passage. When faced consciously, loneliness transforms into solitude's deeper gift, self-intimacy. You begin to enjoy your own company. You learn that peace does not come from being surrounded by people, but from being aligned with yourself. The more you embrace solitude, the more your inner world becomes a sanctuary rather than a prison. Gradually, you start noticing something extraordinary. Clarity. When you detach from external noise, your thoughts become sharper, your emotions more honest, and your sense of direction stronger. What once felt confusing begins to make sense. You start realizing which paths are truly yours to walk and which were inherited from others' dreams. Solitude acts as a purification process, burning away illusions and revealing your authentic purpose. You no longer chase validation, you follow meaning. You no longer perform, you express. You no longer hide behind shoulds and musts. You live through I am. This stage also deepens your compassion. Having faced your own vulnerabilities in silence, you develop empathy for others who struggle with theirs. You no longer judge people for wearing masks because you understand how painful it is to live without them. Instead, you become a quiet presence of authenticity, a person who doesn't need to prove or preach but simply is. Your energy begins to shift. People may sense something peaceful about you, even if they can't explain it. This is the natural magnetism of someone who has made peace with themselves. As solitude turns from discomfort into empowerment, it prepares you for the next stage, embracing vulnerability as strength. Because once you have learned to stand alone, you are no longer afraid of being seen for who you are. You realize that authenticity and vulnerability are not opposites, they are twins born from the same truth. Solitude gives you the foundation. Vulnerability gives you the courage to share that foundation with the world. Thus, the journey moves from awakening to conflict, from conflict to solitude, and now toward openness. Solitude has stripped away the illusions of dependence and shown you your essence. The next step is to bring that essence into relationship, to express it, to live it, and to let it connect you to others from a place of genuine truth rather than conformity. After solitude has stripped away the noise of the world and allowed you to rediscover your authentic essence, the next step in the journey beyond conformity is the act of embracing vulnerability as strength. At first glance, this may seem paradoxical. We are conditioned to equate vulnerability with weakness, to hide our fears, failures, and insecurities behind a mask of composure. But the truth is, vulnerability is not the opposite of strength. It is the foundation of it. To be vulnerable is to live without armor, to show your truth even when it is raw, uncertain, or imperfect. It is the purest expression of authenticity because it reveals the courage to be seen as you truly are. In the previous stage, solitude taught you self-acceptance. You learned to be alone with your thoughts, emotions, and truths without needing validation. Yet solitude, though sacred, is incomplete if it becomes a fortress. To fully live authentically, you must re-enter the world and bring your true self into connection with others. That is where vulnerability becomes essential. Solitude gives you self-awareness, but vulnerability gives you connection. When you allow others to see your truth, not the edited version, but the real one, you create space for genuine relationships to emerge. Relationships rooted not in image or expectation, but in honesty and understanding. However, embracing vulnerability is not easy. It demands that you dismantle years of conditioning that taught you to hide pain, suppress emotion, and present only your strongest side. Society glorifies perfection and achievement while discouraging the open display of fear or uncertainty. From a young age, we learn to wear emotional armor, to say I'm fine when we're not, to laugh when we want to cry, to act strong when we feel fragile. But this armor, though it protects, also suffocates. It traps your authentic self behind layers of pretense. Every time you deny your vulnerability, you distance yourself from your own humanity. True courage is not the absence of fear, it is the willingness to act despite it. Vulnerability is the embodiment of that courage. It means showing up even when you don't know how you'll be received. It means speaking your truth even when your voice trembles. It means admitting, I don't have it all figured out, and finding peace in that honesty. This openness disarms the false self and invites authenticity to breathe freely. The moment you stop pretending to be invulnerable, you begin to feel alive. In relationships, vulnerability becomes the bridge between souls. When you drop your defenses and allow another person to see your imperfections, something magical happens. Their walls begin to lower too. Authenticity begets authenticity. It's a silent invitation that says, you don't have to be perfect here. You can just be. This kind of connection transcends superficial interaction. It nurtures empathy and trust. It transforms love from dependency into partnership, friendship from convenience into kinship. Vulnerability becomes a sacred act of mutual recognition. I see you, and I am seen, yet vulnerability also means accepting the risk of pain. When you open your heart, you expose it to potential rejection, misunderstanding, or loss. That is why so many people avoid it. They equate vulnerability with danger. But the greater danger lies in emotional numbness. When you protect yourself from pain, you also block joy, passion, and intimacy. You may avoid heartbreak, but you also avoid life. To live authentically, you must accept the full spectrum of experience, the light and the dark, the pleasure and the pain. Only then can you taste the depth of human existence. The philosopher Rumi once said, "The wound is the place where the light enters you. Vulnerability is that wound. It is the opening through which wisdom, compassion, and love flow into your being. When you allow yourself to feel deeply, to break and to heal, you gain empathy for the suffering of others. You begin to understand that everyone carries invisible battles, that strength is not found in hardness but in openness. Your tears become teachers. Your struggles become sacred. At this stage, you realize that vulnerability is not an emotional weakness, but a spiritual practice. It requires mindfulness, the ability to stay present with discomfort without fleeing from it. When shame or fear arises, you meet them with curiosity instead of avoidance. You ask, "What are you here to teach me?" You learn that vulnerability is not just about revealing pain, but about embracing your full range of emotion, your joy, gratitude, tenderness, and wonder. It is the permission to live unguarded, to let life touch you fully. In solitude, you built a relationship with your inner self. In vulnerability, you extend that relationship to the outer world. You begin to show up as your whole self. In conversation, in creativity, in love, you stop performing and start expressing. This authenticity radiates energy. It attracts those who resonate with your truth and repels those who thrive on illusion. Slowly, your external world begins to align with your internal one. The people, opportunities, and environments that meet you now do so on the level of truth, not pretense. There is also a deeper spiritual dimension to vulnerability. When you embrace it, you surrender control. You accept that life cannot be managed through perfectionism or prediction. You open yourself to uncertainty, trusting that whatever comes, pain or joy, has purpose. This surrender transforms fear into faith. You no longer see vulnerability as exposure, but as expansion, a way of aligning with the flow of existence rather than resisting it. The self that once sought control begins to dissolve, making space for a wiser, more fluid consciousness to emerge. Vulnerability also strengthens your inner power. It teaches you resilience, not the brittle kind that comes from denial, but the supple kind that comes from acceptance. When you fall and rise, when you are hurt yet remain open, you develop emotional flexibility. You learn that you can survive discomfort and still choose love. This is the heart of authentic strength, not invincibility, but endurance infused with compassion. As you continue to live vulnerably, your presence changes. People sense your genuineness. They feel safe around you because you no longer wear masks. Your openness becomes a silent permission for others to drop theirs. This is how authenticity spreads, not through preaching, but through being. You become a living example of strength through softness, of courage through openness. This stage of embracing vulnerability naturally leads to the next phase of the journey, breaking free from the fear of judgment. For as long as you fear what others think, your vulnerability remains guarded. The next step, therefore, is liberation from external opinion. Once you can stand in your truth without needing anyone's approval, your authenticity becomes unshakable. Vulnerability has taught you how to be real. Now you must learn how to be fearless in that reality. Once you have embraced vulnerability as a strength, the next natural step in the journey beyond conformity is breaking free from the fear of judgment. This is one of the most profound liberations a person can experience, for as long as your sense of self is tethered to the opinions of others, you are not truly free. Judgment, both given and received, has long been the invisible cage that keeps humanity confined within the limits of approval. From childhood, we are conditioned to seek validation, to be good, right, acceptable in the eyes of others. But the authentic self, the one that arises through solitude and vulnerability, cannot breathe in the suffocating air of judgment. Needs space, courage, and self-trust to live fully. In the previous stage, you learned that vulnerability opens you to authenticity. You allowed yourself to be seen, to feel, and to share your truth, even when it was uncomfortable. But as long as the fear of being judged lingers, your vulnerability remains restrained. You may share pieces of your truth, but not the whole story. You may show parts of yourself, but only those you think will be accepted. The fear of judgment acts like an invisible hand that edits your authenticity before it reaches the world. It keeps you performing, apologizing, or hiding, even when your heart longs to be free. The first step toward overcoming this fear is understanding its roots. The need for approval is not weakness. It is a survival mechanism. In early human history, belonging to the tribe meant safety. Rejection often meant death. This ancient instinct still lives within us, whispering that disapproval equals danger. Our modern tribes may be social media circles, peer groups, workplaces, or families, but the underlying fear remains the same. If they reject me, I will be alone. Yet, as you've already discovered through solitude, being alone is not the end, it is the beginning. Once you've learned to find peace within yourself, rejection loses its power. You realize that your worth is not dependent on anyone's opinion. It simply is. Still, the mind resists this truth. It wants to please, to be liked, to be seen as successful or virtuous. That's why breaking free from judgment is not a single decision, but an ongoing practice of awareness. Every time you make a choice, you can ask yourself, am I doing this because it feels true, or because I fear how it will look? That one question can illuminate the subtle chains that still bind you. When you act from authenticity, there may be criticism or misunderstanding, but there will also be peace. When you act from fear, there may be approval, but it will never feel enough. One of the hardest parts of transcending judgment is realizing that it never truly disappears. People will always have opinions, and their perceptions will always be filtered through their own beliefs, wounds, and limitations. You cannot control what others think, but you can control how much power their thoughts hold over your life. The freedom comes not from changing the world, but from no longer needing the world's permission to be yourself. As you begin to detach from external validation, you may experience discomfort. Approval once acted like a drug. It gave you a temporary high of worthiness. Now, without it, you face withdrawal. You might feel uncertain, exposed, or even rebellious, but this discomfort is sacred. It is the shedding of dependency. The more you stand in your truth without apology, the more your nervous system adapts to self-approval. You start realizing that you can survive disapproval and still remain whole. You can be misunderstood and still be at peace. You can be rejected and still belong to yourself. Breaking free from judgment also requires compassion for others and for yourself. Those who judge are often projecting their own unhealed fears. When someone criticizes your authenticity, they are revealing the parts of themselves they have not yet accepted. Similarly, when you catch yourself judging others, it often mirrors the parts of you that still seek healing. Judgment is the ego's way of creating separation. Compassion dissolves that separation. When you meet judgment with understanding instead of defensiveness, you transcend it. You no longer engage in the cycle of reaction. You rise above it in stillness. This liberation does not mean becoming indifferent to others. It means listening with discernment but not dependence. It means valuing feedback without surrendering your identity. There is a difference between learning from others and living for them. Authenticity thrives when you are open-minded yet self-directed. You can take what resonates and release what doesn't, without guilt or resentment. Overcoming the fear of judgment also changes how you relate to success and failure. When you are no longer living for external validation, success stops being about appearances. It becomes about alignment. You no longer ask, will they approve? But rather, does this reflect my truth? Similarly, failure stops being a source of shame. You see it as part of growth, not a reflection of inadequacy. The opinions of others may fluctuate, but your self-worth remains constant. Spiritually, breaking free from judgment marks a profound shift in consciousness. The ego, which thrives on comparison, begins to dissolve. You stop measuring yourself against others and start recognizing the interconnectedness of all beings. You see that everyone is walking their own path, shaped by their own lessons. There is no need to compete or compare because your journey is uniquely yours. In this awareness, humility and confidence merge. You are neither above nor below anyone. You simply are. As this freedom deepens, your energy changes. You become lighter, more present, more magnetic. People feel your authenticity and are drawn to it. Not because you seek approval, but because you radiate peace. You are no longer a reflection of society's expectations. You become a mirror of truth itself, and in doing so, you unconsciously inspire others to question their own fear of judgment. You become an example of what it means to live unbound. This liberation naturally leads to the next stage, living from inner alignment. Once the chains of judgment fall away, you are finally free to live according to your deepest values and intuition. You no longer bend to please the world. You move in harmony with your inner truth. This is where authenticity transforms from an idea into a way of life. It is the stage where purpose, peace, and power unite into one continuous flow. After breaking free from the fear of judgment, you enter the most liberating and harmonious phase of the journey beyond conformity, the stage of living from inner alignment. This is where authenticity ceases to be a concept you strive toward and becomes the rhythm of your existence. Here, your thoughts, emotions, and actions flow as one. There is no longer a conflict between who you are and how you show up in the world. The masks have fallen, the need for approval has dissolved, and what remains is truth, unfiltered, grounded, and alive. You no longer live reactively, bending to external expectations. You live intentionally, guided by the compass of your soul. The previous stage, overcoming the fear of judgment, taught you emotional independence. It helped you realize that your worth is intrinsic, not determined by the shifting opinions of others. That realization creates the foundation for alignment. Once you stop living for validation, you begin to live from integrity. Inner alignment is not about perfection. It is about coherence, a state where your inner world and outer actions reflect one another. It is when your choices resonate with your values, when your words match your beliefs, and when your daily life becomes an expression of your inner truth. At this point, your relationship with yourself transforms completely. The inner conflict that once divided you softens into clarity. You no longer need to force decisions or overthink outcomes. Instead, you listen, deeply and quietly, to your intuition. That voice, once drowned out by noise and doubt, now becomes your most reliable guide. You begin to notice that when something is aligned with your truth, it feels light, peaceful, and expansive. When it is not, it feels heavy, draining, or constrictive. This sensitivity to alignment becomes your inner navigation system. It replaces rules with resonance and control with trust. Living from inner alignment means honoring what feels true, even when it challenges logic or convention. Sometimes this means walking away from opportunities that look good on paper, but feel wrong in your heart. Other times it means taking leaps of faith that make no sense to others, but ignite your spirit. The difference now is that you no longer need external permission to trust yourself. You've learned that your inner voice is not an enemy to be silenced, but a compass to be followed. And when you follow it consistently, life begins to unfold with an effortless harmony. Alignment does not mean the absence of struggle. Life will still bring challenges, uncertainty, and pain, but your relationship to them changes. You no longer resist what is uncomfortable or chase what is pleasurable. Instead, you meet life as it is, responding from a place of centered awareness rather than reaction. You begin to understand that everything that happens, whether pleasant or painful, serves the expansion of your consciousness. This acceptance creates a sense of peace that is not dependent on circumstances. It is the calm of someone who knows that even storms have purpose. From this state of alignment, your outer world begins to reflect your inner clarity. The people and opportunities that come into your life match your frequency. You attract situations that resonate with your values and release those that no longer serve your evolution. Your energy becomes magnetic, not because you're trying to manifest or control outcomes, but because authenticity naturally attracts harmony. You become like a tuning fork. Vibrating in truth, you draw truth toward you. Inner alignment also redefines success. In the world of conformity, success is measured by comparison, wealth, status, recognition. But in authenticity, success is measured by alignment, by how closely your life mirrors your soul. You stop asking, "How much have I achieved?" and begin asking, "How deeply have I lived?" You realize that peace, purpose, and fulfillment are not external trophies, but inner states that arise when your life flows in harmony with your essence. At this level, choices become simpler, not because life becomes easy, but because you no longer betray yourself for convenience. You no longer say yes when your heart says no. You no longer tolerate environments that drain your spirit. You learn the quiet power of boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred lines that protect your energy and honor your truth. Every boundary you set becomes an act of self-love, a declaration that your authenticity matters. Living from inner alignment also transforms relationships. When you are grounded in your truth, you no longer relate to others from need, fear, or pretense. You connect from wholeness. You listen without defensiveness, speak without manipulation, and love without control. You stop demanding that others complete or validate you because you already feel complete within yourself. This shift creates space for relationships built on mutual respect and genuine connection. Relationships where both people are free to be themselves. Another profound gift of alignment is clarity of purpose. When your inner and outer worlds harmonize, your actions begin to serve something greater than personal desire. You feel guided toward work, creativity, or service that expresses your authentic essence. You no longer chase meaning, you become meaning. Every act, no matter how small, feels infused with intention. Whether you are speaking, creating, teaching, or simply being present with someone, you express your soul's truth in form. This is what it means to live a purposeful life, not one dictated by goals, but one animated by inner direction. Spiritually, living from inner alignment marks the integration of the self. The journey that began with awakening from conditioning has come full circle. You've confronted your shadow, faced your fears, embraced solitude, allowed vulnerability, transcended judgment, and arrived at the still center of your being. From here, you understand that authenticity was never something to be achieved. It was your natural state, simply obscured by illusion. Living in alignment means remembering who you've always been beneath the masks, the expectations, and the fear. And yet this stage is not an ending. It is the beginning of conscious living, the art of continuously returning to your truth again and again, no matter what life brings. Alignment is not static. It is a living, breathing dance between your soul and the unfolding world. Some days you will feel deeply connected. Other days you may drift into old patterns. But now you know how to return. By listening inwardly, by honoring your emotions, by trusting your intuition. Each return strengthens your authenticity, making it less of a choice and more of a way of being. Living from inner alignment is ultimately freedom. It is waking each day without the weight of pretending, without the fear of judgment, without the noise of comparison. It is living from the inside out rather than the outside in. It is realizing that peace is not something you find, but something you create by staying true to yourself. When you live in this state, life stops feeling like a struggle to become and starts feeling like a celebration of being. This final stage completes the journey beyond conformity, yet also opens the door to the next evolution, becoming a beacon of authenticity. For once you live in alignment, your life itself becomes a message. You no longer need to tell others how to awaken. Your presence inspires them to remember their own truth. And so, the cycle continues. One awakened soul at a time, radiating light into a world that has forgotten how to be real. When you reach the stage of living from inner alignment, you realize that authenticity is not the final destination. It is the beginning of a new way of being. You no longer see yourself as separate from the world, but as a living expression of truth within it. The next step, the most luminous and selfless one, is becoming a beacon of authenticity, a guiding light for others who are still lost in the shadows of conformity. This is not about preaching or teaching. It is about being. You become an example of what it looks like to live honestly, courageously, and freely. Your very presence inspires others to question, to awaken, and to trust their own path. This stage naturally emerges from the one before it. Living in inner alignment harmonizes your mind, heart, and actions, creating a radiant clarity that others can feel. Without even trying, you begin to influence the world, not through control or persuasion, but through resonance. People are drawn to authenticity because it carries a rare vibration of peace and confidence. It's magnetic precisely because it's real. In a world filled with masks, a genuine soul stands out like light in darkness. When you live aligned with your truth, you give silent permission for others to do the same. Becoming a beacon of authenticity doesn't mean you are flawless or enlightened. It means you have embraced your humanity so fully that your light shines through your imperfections. You no longer hide your scars. You let them tell stories of healing and growth. You no longer deny your vulnerability. You allow it to remind others that strength is found in honesty, not pretense. By embodying your truth, you teach through example that it is safe to be real, that courage is not the absence of fear but the decision to act despite it. Every authentic action ripples outward. When you speak truthfully in a world that rewards silence, you plant a seed of courage in someone else. When you choose integrity over convenience, you show others that alignment is worth more than approval. When you express love without conditions, you remind people that connection doesn't require performance. It requires presence. In this way, your authenticity becomes a quiet revolution, shifting the collective consciousness one encounter at a time. The beacon you become is not powered by ego, but by essence. It is not about gaining followers, admiration, or recognition. True authenticity seeks no audience, it simply shines. You do not become a beacon by forcing light outward. You become one by removing everything that blocks your inner radiance. The ego tries to convince you that you must do something to inspire others. The soul knows that inspiration happens naturally when you simply are yourself. The sun does not announce its light. It just rises, and everything around it awakens. As you grow into this role, you'll notice that the people and experiences around you begin to change. Some may be drawn to your authenticity, while others may feel uncomfortable around it. This is natural. Your presence acts as a mirror. Those ready for truth will see light. Those still hiding will see their own shadows. Part of being a beacon is learning to stay compassionate even when others project their fears onto you. You understand that their reactions are not about you, but about the discomfort of facing their own unrealized selves. This understanding allows you to remain steady, shining without judgment. The journey of becoming a beacon also deepens your sense of purpose. You begin to realize that your life, your struggles, and your transformation were never just about you. Every challenge you overcame, every fear you faced prepared you to hold this light for others. Your authenticity becomes a form of service, a sacred offering to humanity. You are no longer driven by ambition, but by contribution. The question shifts from, what can I gain, to how can I give? You realize that the greatest gift you can offer the world is the full expression of your true self. This stage also brings a profound humility. The more light you carry, the more you see the light in others. You no longer seek superiority or separation. You see unity. You understand that authenticity is not a personal achievement, but a universal state of being that anyone can access. You see yourself as part of a larger awakening, a wave of consciousness moving through humanity. Every time you act from truth, you strengthen that collective energy. Every time you choose love over fear, you contribute to healing the world. However, being a beacon of authenticity doesn't mean life becomes effortless. The world may still challenge you, test your patience, and question your path. Yet now you meet those challenges with grace, knowing that every trial is an opportunity to deepen your integrity. When pain arises, you no longer see it as punishment, but as refinement, a way for your light to grow clearer and purer. The beacon's glow is brightest not because it never faces darkness, but because it has learned how to transform darkness into wisdom. As you embody this light, your words, actions, and silence all begin to carry weight. People will sense your presence even before you speak. This quiet influence is not control. It is coherence. It is what happens when your energy, your truth, and your love are aligned. You no longer need to prove anything. Your existence itself becomes evidence of authenticity's power. You move through the world with a calm confidence that says, I am what I am, and that is enough. Eventually, you realize that being a beacon is not about shining for others, it's about shining with them. You begin to see that every soul carries the same divine spark, waiting to be uncovered. Your role is not to lead, but to illuminate paths. You guide not through authority, but through example. You don't pull people toward your light, you help them find their own. True leadership, you learn, is about empowerment, not dominance. In this stage, your life becomes an ongoing act of love. You speak truth not to impress, but to heal. You create not for fame, but for expression. You connect not to gain, but to give. This is the essence of awakened living, to exist as a channel through which authenticity flows freely into the world. Every breath becomes sacred. Every interaction becomes meaningful. And every moment becomes a reflection of your inner wholeness. And so, the journey that began with awakening from conformity ends not in isolation, but in illumination. You started by breaking free from the world's expectations, then faced the inner battles of vulnerability, judgment, and fear. You learned to listen to your soul, align with your truth, and live from your center. Now you stand not as someone who has escaped the world, but as someone who uplifts it. You embody the very freedom you once sought, and through your presence, you remind others of what they've forgotten, that they too were born authentic. To be a beacon of authenticity is to live as light, silent yet powerful, humble yet radiant, human yet divine. You no longer seek the path, you are the path. Your existence becomes a message that says it is safe to be yourself. It is enough to be real. It is beautiful to be human. And as others feel this truth awaken within them, your light spreads endlessly, from one heart to another, until the world itself begins to glow with the brilliance of remembered souls.